I am 91 years old. I have lived long enough to watch the world change from wooden radios to glowing screens. I have lived long enough to bury almost all of my friends. But most of all, I have lived long enough to realize that the cruelest thing about time is the silent truth waiting for us at the very end. I just quietly passed my 60th wedding anniversary alone in an empty house. My wife, Brenda, died 3 years ago. Her funeral was on a rainy afternoon in late October. Hundreds of people from our town came to pay their respects. They held my aging hands and looked into my eyes with genuine sorrow. They whispered beautiful words of comfort. They told me we had lived a complete and magnificent life. They called us a rare symbol of eternal fidelity in a broken world. And the tragedy is, I believed them. I truly believed that perfect story for over half a century. Our marriage was never an explosive romantic novel. I am a structural engineer named Larry. I am a practical man who spent his life dealing with blueprints, precise measurements, and rigid lines. My world was governed by load-bearing capacities and solid concrete. Brenda was the complete opposite. She was as soft and unpredictable as an autumn stream. She had the free roaming soul of an artist. She loved planting blue hydrangeas on our front porch, reading classic poetry, and humming gentle melodies while preparing breakfast. We were two completely different puzzle pieces that somehow fit together to create a picture of a flawless American family. I built this sprawling wooden house for her with my own hands in the year 1965. I calculated every angle so the living room would have massive south-facing windows, allowing Brenda to catch the full warmth of the afternoon sun. I worked incredibly hard, dedicating my youth to my construction sites. I believed providing was the highest form of love. I never came home late without a reason. I never forgot her birthday. I never let my wife or our young child worry about bills or groceries. My pension and investments were more than enough for us to take a winter vacation down south every single year. I looked at the walls I built and genuinely believed I was an exemplary husband. I was proud to provide a safe harbor that would never waver. However, the deepest pain a man can experience does not come from a sudden physical blow. It does not come from divorce papers or hidden financial debts. The pain tearing my soul apart at 91 lies entirely within a small cedar wood box, hidden at the bottom of Brenda's forgotten clothing trunk. It began on a quiet Tuesday morning last week. My arthritis makes movement difficult, but I finally decided to clean out Brenda's oldest belongings for the local church charity. I made my way up to the dusty attic. 3 years had passed, and her comforting lavender scent had faded, replaced by the smell of mothballs and bygone years. As I pulled thick layers of hand-knitted sweaters from the oak trunk in the corner, my hand brushed against a hard object. It lay hidden at the very bottom, wrapped in a wool scarf. It was a solid cedar wood box, worn down by time, sealed shut by a small brass padlock. Throughout our entire marriage, sharing the exact same bed every night, I had never known of this box's existence. A heavy premonition made my chest tighten. I went back down to our bedroom and spent an hour rummaging through her ornate jewelry box. Finally, hidden beneath the red velvet lining, I found a tiny, tarnished brass key. I sat on the edge of the bed and inserted the key. The padlock sprang open with a sharp click. It echoed deafeningly in the absolute silence of the bedroom, like a heavy iron prison door slamming shut. Inside, There were no hidden legal documents or plots to steal my house. There were only letters, about 40 individual letters, stuffed into yellowed envelopes. Their frayed edges proved they had been obsessively opened and read thousands of times. Alongside the letters was a single, pressed blue iris flower, dried until it was translucent. Right beneath that flower lay a small black and white photograph. I picked up the photograph. My failing eyes had to squint to make out the shapes. In the picture, Brenda looked young and vibrant, about 35 years old. I recognized with terrifying certainty that this was taken in the blazing summer of 1968. That was the year I traveled thousands of miles away for 4 grueling months to supervise the construction of a steel suspension bridge. In the photograph, Brenda is smiling. It is not the measured, polite smile she gave me at the dinner table. It is a blindingly radiant, wild, uninhibited smile. And the detail that caused my heart to stop beating was the fact that she was resting her head lovingly on the shoulder of another man. His name was Silas. He was a freelance photographer with the untethered soul of a nomad. He had rented a drafty cabin 3 streets away that sweltering summer. I had crossed paths with him a handful of times before I left for my trip. Silas had messy curly hair, the deep eyes of a starving artist, and a carefree smile. He represented everything I could never be: pure romance, absolute freedom, unpredictable passion. He must have set a timer on his camera, captured that moment of ecstasy, and left this single print behind before vanishing forever. I put on my reading glasses, my wrinkled hands trembling violently. I pulled the first letter out, August 14th, 1968. The words were beautiful in a deeply devastating way. Silas wrote, using an emotional vocabulary a dry engineer like myself could never manage. He wrote about the poetic way the morning light danced on Brenda's hair. He wrote about how her soul blazed when she discussed paintings. He deeply understood the quiet sorrow behind her eyes, the desperate yearning of a wild bird trapped inside a highly comfortable cage of domestic stability, a cage I had sweat blood to build for her. Every sentence felt like a razor-sharp blade slicing through my masculine pride. I had provided material safety, but Silas reached into her chest and touched the beating source of life within her soul. He gave her a reason to feel entirely alive. At the bottom of the stack, I found pieces of cheap-lined scratch paper. These were draft letters Brenda had carefully written, crossed out, and rewritten, but never sent. The final draft was dated September 6th, 1968, just 10 days before my bridge project ended and I returned home. The handwriting was violently shaky. Blurred ink smudges revealed she had sobbed while writing those lines. She wrote to Silas that this brief summer beside him was the only time in her existence she had truly lived. Beside him, she was no longer a predictable housewife, imprisoned in a boring routine. But then, the words grew heavier. She wrote that she could not leave with him. She could not allow their passion to burn her family to the ground. Larry is a good man. She wrote, he sweat blood to build me this beautiful house. He unconditionally loves our young child, and he has never done a malicious thing to hurt me. I choose to stay with him. I choose to stay because of my responsibility, my family vows, and the undeniable safety his hard work brings. I will lock my heart away with my own 2 hands, burying it deep within the memories of this summer, for all eternity so my family can survive. Please forgive my cowardice. She begged him, and please forget that I ever existed. I folded the fragile letter back up. My wife did not commit a financial crime against me. She did not sneak a lover into our home. Standing at the ultimate crossroads of her life, torn between true romantic love and moral family responsibility, she chose me. She chose the safe, boring engineer. But the cruel irony is that this supposedly noble sacrifice made in the name of marital duty is the exact weapon that has crushed my soul into a million unfixable fragments. The true betrayal did not lie in that brief, hidden summer of 1968. The absolute most devastating betrayal resided entirely in the 54 years of our lives that immediately followed. Leaning heavily on my wooden walking cane, I took agonizing steps toward the old leather armchair in the living room. I sank into the cushions, looking out the massive window I designed to bring her light. The past half-century began to rewind before my eyes. In the decades after 1968, Brenda remained a flawless, dedicated wife. She cooked my favorite meals. She meticulously ironed my shirts. She raised our child to a healthy adulthood. But now, illuminated by the harsh truth from that cedar box, I understood the terrifying chasms that always existed between us. I remembered those long autumn afternoons when I read the news, and Brenda stood completely silently by the kitchen sink for an unnatural amount of time. I had stupidly thought she was exhausted from chores. No, she was standing there missing him. I remembered those bitter winter nights when I pulled her warm body into my embrace, and she would let out a soft, trembling sigh. I had arrogantly thought it was the sound of absolute peace. No, it was the sound of crushing resignation. It was the stifled internal sob of a wild bird actively breaking its own wings to willingly remain inside its safe cage. Throughout more than half a century of constant companionship, I only ever played the pathetic role of a safe, reliable alternative. I was the physical representative of financial stability. I was a moral duty. I was never the burning, true love inside her hidden heart. All the gentleness and careful attention she bestowed upon me was a complex form of psychological compensation. It was a silent daily act of atonement, the paying of a lifelong heavy emotional debt for the fact that her heart had secretly run away and belonged to another man a very long time ago. At the fragile age of 91, I bitterly realize I would have much preferred to discover my wife was a cruel, manipulative villain. I wish she had stolen the deed to this house and shamelessly eloped to the West Coast in 1968. If that had happened, I would have had the right to fiercely hate her. I could have raged against the universe. A massive explosion of righteous anger would have given my younger self the strength to stand back up and start over. A blatant betrayal of material wealth is much easier for a logical engineer to combat with lawyers and anger. But how can you possibly hate a woman who actively killed the greatest love of her life with her own two hands, just for you? How can you hold anger toward a woman who willingly accepted the agonizing sacrifice of her own grandest personal happiness just to maintain her moral duty to her child and care for you until her final breath? You cannot. You are rendered completely powerless. You have absolutely no right to be angry, and no standing to hold a bitter grudge. You can only sit paralyzed in your expensive leather armchair, feeling a bottomless emptiness slowly corroding your soul, chewing away at the last remaining shreds of an old man's pride. This morning, The sky outside was incredibly clear. I walked slowly out into the front garden and cut a vibrant bouquet of blue hydrangeas. Determined to bring them to the cemetery, Brenda's grave lies peacefully beneath the dense shade of a massive ancient oak tree, the polished white marble radiating a chilling coldness. I stood leaning on my cane for a very long time. I kept my fading eyes glued to her name meticulously carved into the smooth marble. Brenda, my wife, the woman I held securely in my arms for over 50 years. Staring at the cold dirt, I realized with absolute clarity that she was the greatest stranger I had ever known. I did not bring the fragile letters to the graveyard. Last night, unable to sleep, I lit a roaring fire in the living room fireplace. I slowly dropped every single yellowed envelope, those heartbreaking draft pages, and that photograph straight into the glowing hearth. I sat in suffocating silence, spreading my freezing hands out to warm them. I watched as the pieces of paper containing the entirety of someone else's passionate love story curled up, turned pitch black, and magically transformed into fragile handfuls of grey ash that floated away through the dark brick chimney. In the flickering firelight, I realized the most bitter truth of an entire human life. In the incredibly long play of our flawless suburban marriage, I had always arrogantly prided myself on being the main character, the hero of the story, but in stark reality, I was nothing more than a well-paid gatekeeper, an unaware stagehand. I had spent my existence using my engineering skills to keep this massive house standing strong against the rain and snow, successfully creating a perfectly safe, impenetrable domestic space. Solely so, her wandering soul could have a highly secure sanctuary to privately mourn and endlessly yearn for another man until the day she died. I slowly bent down over the grave, every aged joint in my spine cracking in fierce protest, and gently placed the vibrant blue hydrangeas onto the freezing cold marble slab. I know now, Brenda, I whispered softly into the empty air. I know absolutely all about the hidden story of that summer. I know all about Silas, and I forgive you. Thank you for making the incredibly difficult choice to stay by my side, for cooking my meals for over half a century, and for giving me a family. Even though that agonizing decision to stay, that dedicated soul-crushing sacrifice, ultimately morphed into the most perfect and ruthless lie you could have ever told me. You executed your difficult role flawlessly, and I happily lived inside that warm illusion for over half a century. That is far more peace and stability than most men ever receive. That is more than enough for one single lifetime. I forced myself to stand up straight, taking slow, exhausted steps across the cemetery, grass soaked with freezing morning dew. My sturdy, impeccably engineered wooden house still stands incredibly tall and unyielding at the end of the road, perfectly intact and incredibly beautiful to anyone driving past. I do not have a single cent of financial debt to worry my aging mind. My bank accounts possess more than enough accumulated wealth for me to easily hire the best private nurses, allowing me to live in total physical comfort until the exact day I close my eyes forever. Looking from the outside in, my life is a stunning architectural masterpiece of such absolute completion that other people are forced to burn with intense jealousy when they look at me. It is just that. As I walk alone along the concrete sidewalk in this brilliant sun-drenched autumn morning, surrounded by the physical evidence of my lifelong success, I find myself feeling completely hollow and colder than I have ever felt. Because when you are 91 years old, walking with a cane, and you suddenly realize you spent the absolute entirety of your life merely warming a heart that never once truly beat for you. The truth is inescapable. It simply does not matter how massive or structurally fortified your house might be. It does not matter how much wealth is securely deposited in your bank book. When the love was an illusion, everything you built is just an empty, freezing museum, existing for the sole tragic purpose of imprisoning the decaying body of an old man right alongside the shattered remnants of his lifelong illusions.